From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and right away here, K-State's Dan O'Brien on the grain markets. He'll pass along his latest price probability projections for corn and soybeans for this marketing year. And Dan will talk about how the row crop markets are fully attuned to this weekend's weather in the Corn Belt. Then, K-State's Jeff Whitworth alerting you producers about the presence of green cloverworms in soybeans, blister beetle swarms in alfalfa, and grasshoppers just about everywhere, and what should or shouldn't be done about these respective pests. Today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update features Extension Agricultural Agent Alan Baker of Wichita County, and K-State's Mary Knapp is standing by to talk Kansas agricultural weather. That's our lineup on this Agriculture Today. Welcome to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Glad to have you aboard. Well, weather is in the driver's seat in as far as grain market movements, most assuredly so in recent trading days. We'll pick up on that and other grain market matters now. Grain market economist Dan O'Brien, K-State Research and Extension, from his office in Colby, Northwest Kansas. And we saw the dramatic reaction to the prospect, Dan, of badly needed rainfall in the Corn Belt in price action at midweek.
Historic seasonal patterns are playing out before our eyes, or the fear of historic seasonal patterns that could kick in. And a lot of times we'll see if the corn crop was in with no problem in June and there was moisture there, nobody anticipated any issues, we'd see prices start a downtrend into July, August, and if there were no further threats, then on into the October harvest. We've been bouncing around for the September contract between 525 and 650. So it's noteworthy that even with the ups and downs we've had, that we're still in the same trading range we'd had at the bottom about 525 that has lasted since early May. So what happens in coming days is pretty important. And as you'd said, what I understand is the anticipation of further rain coming has been taken fully to heart by traders, and they've turned more negative. We do try to follow the Commodity Futures Trading Commission commitments of traders, and it is interesting to see for corn that the positive long positions for the managed money speculators still strong, but been declining some here of late. You know, the real strength in all that for corn happened within the last month, again in May. And since then, we've had some more tepidness, some more fear of crop conditions, turning better, and prices moving to the lower side. So to date, it's just interesting. We have had just minimal short positions in the corn futures market for speculative traders for about 1 or 2 months. So as this goes forward, I think here we're selling the forecast. We'll see what happens in the actuality of all this. So any rain that comes, will it undo potential damage to stands, to growth and development that's happened so far? Generally, we say that corn's made in July and, of course, soybeans made in August. And again, you look at the most recent drought monitor maps and where rainfall has been at, et cetera, soil moisture rankings. My goodness, it's pretty tough in the Dakotas, in all of Minnesota, in the northern 3/4 of Iowa, and on into some other areas. So I don't think that the questions will be completely answered with rainfall that comes here now, but it'll be hard to be extremely bearish on production if rainfall falls in these areas, and at least until we get more information. We do have a WASDE report, World Ag Supply Demand Estimates report, coming out on Monday on the 12th.
And will that World Agricultural Supply and Demand report be of much consequence, Dan?
Well, I think that on the usage side, that report there'll be adjustments in it for what came out of the quarterly stocks report on the 30th, and to probably show some more usage, probably in the feed residual category in corn, and also will show a little bit more usage for soybeans. So it could trim off the projected ending stocks figures if all else is held equal. And I think that report will also make use of the new acreage numbers that are out there. For corn, it is up, but not by as much as thought. And again, now projected at 92.692 million acres, and harvested acres 84.495. And again, that's up about a little less than 2 from the previous year. So that's all as it is. That'll be tied in for corn. For soybeans, you'll see, again, last year at 83 million acres. This year, that acreage report came in for soybeans projecting about 87.6 million acres. Again, those will be dialed in, but it's pretty obvious that the market's paying attention to yield prospects more than acreage. And of course, part of that, harvested acreage, planted to harvested. So I think so much of what we'll be doing now until we get solid numbers out of the USDA, NASS reports, crop production reports, we'll get some information in August, but probably in September, October, November, we'll be wondering about yield prospects. So I guess we'll see. So again, when you look at pre-report estimates for those numbers, almost no analyst is anticipating USDA will budge much at all off of their yield numbers. Now, which means they might. And if they went anywhere, I think they'd go lower because of the damage in the northern states in the West. But we'll see. And for soybeans, again, a little later planted, and we grow a lot of soybeans in northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, and North Dakota now, and a lot of potential damage there that could certainly happen. But will the market be cognizant of that? And or will the USDA, on their model-based forecasts, step out and say, hey, I think there's enough damage in those areas that we're going to make adjustments. So it's kind of the hand-wringing time to figure out all the uncertainty of the market, and we'll see where it all goes.
Well, in your market notes this week, you have posted your latest price probability projections for corn and for soybeans. And to remind listeners, what you do is put out certain what-if scenarios as far as supply, demand, plugging in the latest USDA numbers and the like, and then attach a potential average price for those scenarios. Tell us about what your corn numbers say, Dan.
Well, for old crop 2020-21, which will end on August 31st, basically following the lead of that quarterly stocks report, have lowered my ending stocks figures down to from about 1.1 billion to about 950 million. So, again, you're trying to gauge exports and usage in these different areas. So that has some significance if that 950 comes about. And I think there's 75% chance, 3/4 chance there'll be some adjustment there. The USDA will have to follow what they put out in the grain stocks report. So then, to the degree you take down those ending stocks for the old crop, then September 1, if you really do get below 1 billion bushels down to 950 million, then you put the pressure on the yields. First, I'll say it numerically, then I'll say what's really saying. There's about 35% chance that the USDA is right for next year, and with the 179 bushels per acre, saying there's more like 50 to 55% chance, by my own judgment, that we're closer to 175, given the damage that we've had, some lateness and issues and uncertainties. There's about a 10% chance of maladies. We can't anticipate. These rains fail, we turn dry, you name it, with 171 bushels. And I'm more inclined right now to look at what the futures are forecasting than I am the USDA's numbers. The USDA's came out in that June report, and prices were hot. They put high numbers out, and I'm finding that the futures markets, again, if you look at the span of lead and trailing deferred contracts, you're looking at something closer to like $4.50 for both old crop and new crop. And what's really interesting too is that those futures, as they go for corn, as they go out there, they're showing pretty level strength all the way through, and that probably would be something I'd question actually happening. I should shift over quickly to soybeans. USDA projected 87.555 million acres, and also a yield of 50.8 bushels per acre. And I'm saying that with the damage you've seen in those northern states, I guess I'm a little less anxious to just say, yeah, I don't think the soybean number can be reached. Really think there's about a 50% chance that the USDA is right on that 50.8. And about a combined 50% chance of something lower, closer to 47, 48, 49 bushels per acre. The thing is, you're just scraping the bottom on stocks and stocks to use all the way through there. So to the degree we start backing off that 50, 51 bushels per acre number, you're just tight all the way through that next marketing year. It'll tend to hold prices up pretty well. And, futures are projecting about 1237 for that next marketing year. And by my calculations, that's with the 50.8 bushels per acre. And you start cranking that down, you start adding, getting to 13 and 13 and a half, which, is awfully high if you're a buyer, but not out of the realm of possibility given where we're at, where we've been here of late in the soybean market.
And all of these numbers, by the way, depicted fully in the market notes at agmanager.info. One last thing here, Dan. Wheat price basis is still holding its ground at delivery points around Kansas, even as we are ever nearer to wrapping up this harvest.
Yeah, the only place that I can see in the midst of harvest in most of the state where our cash wheat basis is in the southeast part. Every place else, at least at these major terminals that we're following, holding up pretty well. So that's indicative of underlying usage and demand. And I would say, since we talked about corn and soybeans so much this week, we'll take a lot closer look at wheat in particular, and also sorghum next week.
We can certainly do that, and will. Dan, thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Our weekly grain market segment featuring grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, Dan O'Brien. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today continues now, and we've a host of insects fully active in our field crops once again. As you know, we keep you briefed on that activity and what control responses you might want to employ, producers, as we go through the growing season. And Jeff Whitworth is back once more to cover several fronts here. Jeff is a crop entomologist, K-State Research and Extension. Here's a pest that, yes, shows up in soybeans sometimes, but primarily a worry in alfalfa. That is the blister beetle, which you say is starting to be more prominent right now, Jeff.
Yes, and good morning. Blister beetles are a serious concern and always have been. The problem with blister beetles, and there's several different species, the all black one, all gray one, the brown and black and orange and black, and they all carry the characteristic chemical compound cantharidin. That's really what we're worried about. It's not the beetle itself, it's the chemical that they carry, and that chemical can last quite a while. And it can be very dangerous to certain animals if they ingest it or if they eat it.
Specifically horses.
Yes, horses seem to be a little more susceptible to it, but it can also affect cattle and goats and sheep and any other animal that actually ingests it. The problem right now is the blister beetles are just coming out as adults. In my opinion, the interesting thing about blister beetles, most of this different species of blister beetles, as young, they feed on grasshopper eggs. So the blister beetle adults are just now coming out as the grasshoppers are just starting, the eggs are starting to hatch, and the little grasshopper nymphs are coming out. Blister beetle adults are now coming out. What they're going to do is they will feed a little bit, and they will cluster or aggregate or congregate or whatever you want to call it for the next, probably 2 or 3 weeks, depending upon the different species. They can be large groups of hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of adult blister beetles in a small area for mating purposes. Now, while they're doing this, they don't feed a lot, but they can feed a little bit. So if there's a huge swarm of these adult blister beetles in a soybean field, they can defoliate a patch of soybeans considerably, and it can be concerning. They can also do that in alfalfa, but remember, an alfalfa canopy is usually a little thicker, so they usually don't defoliate it as much. And also, if they are in alfalfa, we recommend do not treat them in the alfalfa because you can kill them with an insecticide. That's kind of the point of an insecticide, right? Is to kill them. Well, you can kill them. The problem with that is the body of that beetle will stay out there in that field, and that cantharidin can be active for a considerable amount of time if it's not in the direct sunlight. So if it falls down in the residue or the leaf litter, it gets underneath the canopy, and then it's swathed or raked up. Even though the beetle's dead, the cantharidin can still be active and still cause a reaction in a horse or some other animal if they ingest it. So if you see these big swarms in alfalfa, it's best just to leave them. Walk away. Now, if they're in soybeans, I have seen them cause some concern because of the large swarms and the amount of defoliation they do. You really don't want to treat them probably in either crop, whether it's alfalfa or soybeans, because it's going to be transitory. They're not going to be there very long. But like I said, if you have thousands of them in soybeans, and if those soybeans are just getting to a reproductive stage where, you don't want them to lose even up to 20 or 30% of the vegetation, you might just, spray a small area where the blister beetles are congregating. Otherwise, they were going to head out and move out and lay eggs in other places.
Well, you mentioned grasshoppers there, Jeff, and just briefly on those, are they more prolific this summer than normal?
There are a lot of grasshoppers right now, yes. I mean, we've had relatively good weather. relatively for Kansas for this time in July, it's relatively cool. We've had enough moisture. They're just starting, at least in the last week, they're just starting to move out into the alfalfa fields, and they're just starting to move out into these small, succulent soybean fields, at least the ones I was around. So I'm guessing that's going to be the way it is all over the state. As the grasses start to dry down in the waterways or along the sides of the field, or as the guys go out and spray their weeds, it will kill the natural vegetation. They'll move out into the crop fields, and that's where they can cause problems. So right now, if you are spraying weeds, it doesn't hurt if you have grasshoppers, probably 5 to 8 per square foot. Right now, they're really small nymphs, so you got to look pretty closely. I mean, the ones I've seen in the last week are about the size of potato leafhoppers, and those are pretty small, so you got to look pretty close. But now's the time to get them because they're more vulnerable. They don't move as much. As you put a herbicide in and spray around your weeds, if you have a grasshopper problem you think you're going to, it's not a bad idea right now to put an insecticide in, and hopefully before they move out into a field, so that will save you an application later on of an insecticide.
They can be an economic threat to your standing crops, grasshoppers. And again, matching up with potato leafhoppers, we visited about those previously, and they're still around.
Oh, potato leafhoppers, they're really migrating into the state during alfalfa. And alfalfa is what we really worry about because they do cause the what we call hopper burn. As they feed on the alfalfa, not only are they removing the juice from the plant, but they're also introducing a toxin as they feed. And this toxin and the combination of the toxin and the plant juice removal will cause the yellowing of the leaves. And if they continue on, the whole leaf will yellow, the stem will yellow, and the plant can actually wilt. And a lot of guys attribute that to July and August in Kansas, right? And part of it is, but if you go out and you look and you take a sweep net, which is what we recommend for sampling for potato leafhoppers, and you have 1 or 2 per 4 or 5 samples in your sweep net, that's the treatment threshold. It's a very low treatment threshold. It just doesn't take very many. So what you're seeing mainly are the adults. The adults are winged. They're a little more active, so they're a little more easily seen. But the nymphs are the ones that are just starting to hatch out. They're really tiny. They don't fly. They will crawl underneath the leaf, or they will jump around the side of a stem so that you don't normally see them. So that's why it's really best to use a sweep net, sweep them off the plant. The adults are easily seen. They're just very active. Don't confuse them with aphids, because there are a few pea aphids out right now, which we're not really concerned about. It's just the potato leafhoppers that are migrating in, and probably will for another couple of weeks.
Keep an eye out for those pests. And finishing off here with a quick word on another potential insect enemy to soybeans, green cloverworms. They're in the moth form, you say?
The green cloverworms a week or so ago were in the mature larval stage. For the most part, at the temperatures we have now, they crawl down into the soil to pupate, and then they emerge as moths. And the moths are these little aerodynamic-shaped nondescript brown moths that you see. A lot of people call them grass moths. Usually when you're walking out in the field, they kind of fly up in front of you and then they go back down. And in a soybean field or an alfalfa field, and they will lay eggs in alfalfa, which is probably not going to matter much, but they will probably be laying eggs in soybeans. And as most soybean growers know from years past, the green cloverworm larva is voracious. I mean, they feed 24/7, and they'll feed from the time the egg hatches for about 2 to 3 weeks. And as they grow, they skeletonize these leaves more and more. So if you have a good infestation of green cloverworms, you look out in the field, your plants look silvery because of the skeletonization. The nice thing, if you can say that, about green cloverworms, there's a fungus, a white fungus that will usually come on probably 7 to 10 days after the infestation starts, and it can actually decimate the populations. But like I said, there's a lag time. It takes 7 to 10 days, but if you're out looking in your field, you're doing the old drop cloth with the plant shake method over the drop cloth and counting the number of green cloverworms. If you see any white ones, or if you're looking in the foliage in the canopy and you see any white ones, those are fungal infected. And that means Bavaria, the fungus, has gotten started. And if you wait 3 or 4 days, it will probably take hold and do a pretty good job of controlling the green cloverworms. So this is a time when the vegetative stage of soybeans can accept 50 to 60% defoliation without much of a problem and very little impact on yield. I mean, we've done all kinds of studies, the agronomy department has, but when those beans get up into the reproductive stage, it drops dramatically to 20 to 30%. So you want to be out looking weekly because there's a lot of defoliators coming on right now, and they are going to be over the next 2 to 3 weeks feeding on those young soybeans.
Full heads up on green cloverworms in beans and these other pest issues that might be present in your crop fields, and respond accordingly, as Jeff has outlined for us today. And we're hardly done yet with insects getting after it in our field crops, Jeff, so we'll have you back soon and find out what else is going on at that time. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Eric.
He's along regularly during the summertime to talk crop insect control. Jeff Whitworth is a crop entomologist with K-State Research and Extension, and on this part of Agriculture Today. Next for you on this Agriculture Today, the wheat harvest report for the day. And we'll go to far west central Kansas and catch up on harvest progress in Wichita County. The Extension agricultural agent there is Alan Baker. Alan, before we talk about the results so far of wheat cutting in Wichita County, a chronology, if you will, of this crop, did it not start out a bit shaky given the dry fall?
Yeah, Eric, it did. We had a very dry fall, not much snow over the winter, and then we had really cold days. Everybody was a little bit worried about that cold snap, and then, end of April and May turned off wet and turned this wheat crop completely around.
So it really is besting expectations, it sounds, as we get into some numbers here.
Definitely. We are seeing a wheat crop that nobody expected. We saw some freeze damage earlier on this spring, but it turned out not to be near as bad as we thought.
As of now, the issue is getting things done. The progress has been sporadic at best, you say, Alan.
Definitely. We've seemed to be getting weekly rains for the past 3 weeks. We're usually up and going around the 20th, and we are hopefully 60% by today.
Which is well behind what you would normally be on the 9th of July. You say you'd be done. Yes,
definitely. We usually are done within a couple days after the 4th of July. And I'm hoping to be, by the end of this weekend, to be in 75-80% done.
All right. Well, as far as yields and test weights that have come in, what are the numbers you're hearing?
Excellent yields. I've heard low-end yields of 45 to 50 on dry land. I've heard upper-end yields for dry land 80, 90, 100. We've had tremendous yields. Irrigated's holding in there at its usual, 90, 100, 110. Test weights wise, no big bushel busters. They're 58 to 62. Doesn't seem to be any extremely high test weights, but good for what we've seen in the forecast.
Given, though, the weather interruptions, have there been any quality issues of note?
Not that I know of. I've talked to multiple farmers, and proteins are looking good. There again, nothing tremendous, but a lot of 11s, a lot of 12s. I'm sure there's some 13 and 14s I haven't heard about, but so far everything looks good. With the rains, we haven't seen any sucker heads popping yet. Everything's going good. I was out in the country last night, saw a few fields that were being cut that were pretty much down, laying flat, and there was not a lot of dirt flying out of those machines, just a lot of chaff.
And that leads to another issue that's popped up in parts of western Kansas. Wanted to see if it has been the case in Wichita County. An unusual outbreak of head scab disease in wheat. Did you experience that there?
No, I've not heard of it nor have seen it. I've looked at a lot of wheat over the past 2 weeks out and about, and not seeing really any issues in our wheat.
All right. Diseases in general were held at bay?
Yes, very little rust. With all the rain this spring, we thought, especially in May, we thought we'd see a lot of stripe rust, but we have not seen much of any rust this year.
And an overview, how would you compare this harvest to the harvest of the last decade or so? One of the better ones for Wichita County?
Definitely. This would be one of our better harvests probably in the last decade or two. It's been an excellent harvest. And
the sentiments of your producers have to be on a pretty high level right now, don't they?
Definitely, Eric. Our guys are, aside from the rain delays, are in very good moods. The yields are great. And it's also these rains are helping our fall crops, so you can't totally complain about them.
Alan, thank you for sharing a few moments on harvest progress in Wichita County, and here's to your producers having that open weather to finish things up. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Eric.
Alan Baker is the Extension Agricultural Agent in Wichita County, west central Kansas, and offering today's Kansas Wheat Harvest Update. And now it's on to this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Here's Marcia Boswell.
It's a country that imports about 800,000 metric tons of wheat each year, a mere 90 miles from the United States. Yet the Cuban wheat market has long been a source of optimism and frustration for U.S. wheat farmers. With the change in administrations, there is hope for re-engagement with Cuba, but ultimately the 60-year-old embargo and associated policies still stand as a solid barrier to beneficial trade. General public opinion polls on Cuba policy consistently show most Americans favor more engagement. The last decade has seen a roller coaster of changes in U.S. policy. Under the Obama-Biden administration, there were efforts to establish a new relationship and relax tensions. This included a new interpretation of cash in advance rules that apply to payment for any agricultural commodities, bilateral exchanges by technical staff in regulatory agencies, and the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Havana. However, none of those changes resulted in actual wheat purchases. Then the Trump administration further restricted trade by limiting any business conducted between American companies and state-owned companies such as flour mills in Cuba. Any realistic effort to expand ag trade with Cuba needs to focus on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue by working to secure meaningful change within the halls of Congress and addressing the bipartisan opposition to trade with Cuba. Just such a congressional effort was launched in June by U.S. Senators John Boozman of Arkansas and Michael Bennet of Colorado with the introduction of the Agricultural Export Expansion Act. That bill would allow private financing of agricultural commodities by U.S. companies, a small first step toward normalizing the trading relationship, but an important one to put U.S. companies on a near-level playing field when working with Cuban buyers. Several U.S. agricultural organizations, including U.S. Wheat Associates and the National Association of Wheat Growers, signed a letter of support for the effort as ad hoc members of the United States Agricultural Coalition for Cuba. The Ag Export Expansion Bill is not the only pro-normalization effort within Congress. U.S. Senators Jerry Moran of Kansas, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, and Patrick Leahy of Vermont, all long-term Cuba trade advocates, earlier this year introduced the Freedom to Export to Cuba Act, which would lift substantial portions of the embargo, including restrictions prohibiting transactions between U.S. and Cuban firms. Farmers are right to be interested in opening the Cuban wheat market. Cuba produces no wheat domestically and would be a substantial U.S. market if government barriers were to be lifted. But for any of that optimism to come to fruition, it's going to take a literal act of Congress. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, our weekly look at Kansas agricultural weather, and alongside once more, as always, research and extension climatologist Mary Knapp reporting on more rain interruptions, Mary, in our wheat harvest around Kansas, as we've heard from our county and district extension agents this past week. Producers have been able to get in, but have dodged a few drops here and there.
Right, and it's interesting that some of the areas where they've had to do the dodging have been in our western parts of the state. West central Kansas actually had the largest percent of normal. They averaged 1.39 inches, which is just under 2 times what they would normally see in the week. Central itself missed out, but the East Central Division was the other high division. They averaged 1.57 inches, but again, they should get more, so their percent of normal was only 175% of normal. Still ample rain to interfere with harvest, but needed for the corn and the beans that are struggling to get up and going, particularly the soybeans, which had some uneven stands as they were coming up.
Need to acknowledge that heavy rains in parts of eastern Kansas to the degree of notable flooding.
Right, and a lot of that was a carryover from the week before, which had literally gully washer level rains, and so it didn't take much to create additional flooding issues in that area. And they're still suffering from saturated soils, which will delay any kind of field work that might be attempted.
So how does the latest drought monitor read? We've at least one hot spot in the north central part of the state, you say?
Right. North central was the low end of the stick on the rain gauge. They averaged only 0.06 of an inch, which is 6% of their normal rainfall. So it's not surprising that that's beginning to show up on the drought monitor. That's where the largest area of abnormally dry conditions are, and that's where the moderate drought crept across the border from Nebraska. So we're looking forward to the chances of rain tonight and into tomorrow, and hopefully some of that will fall in that north central area.
More details on that to come shortly here. Temperatures over this past week a bit short of normal, you say?
Right. They were on the cool side, actually comfortable for July. Our highs, all of the divisions came close to 90. The Northeast hit 89 for the highest temperature on July 4th. The Northwest had the highest temperature for the state. That was 96 degrees, and that was in a scattered number of stations up in that northwest corner of the state.
Now, we're watching this with extra intent anymore because those growing degree day accumulations become very pivotal for our row crops. And are those GDDs building up sufficiently?
Oh, yes, they would be building up. For corn in particular, temperatures over 90 don't contribute to the growing degree units. So having those highs in the 89-degree range keep that accumulation going without the stress that the high temperatures might produce otherwise. As sorghum starts going, they don't have that upper threshold bound, and they'll accumulate a little bit more quickly with the higher temperatures than corn would. We've got a lot of corn now that is moving into the tasseling, silking stage, so not having those really high temperatures is favorable. We can get better kernel set, not create the issues that upper 90 or low 100 would create during that time of development.
Well, looking ahead, this system you referred to just a moment ago, moving in later today and tonight into tomorrow, and this will be a fairly widespread event, it sounds.
At this point, it looks like it will be. Again, the amounts that are produced in different areas will vary, and it could be not very large distance between the haves that get quite a bit and the have-nots, which don't see much at all. If we look at the quantitative precip forecast for the next week, we are seeing the heaviest amounts around the fringes of this state, particularly the eastern border with Missouri, where they may see as much as an inch or two additional moisture. As you get into the central core of the state, we're looking more at the quarter to half inch total for the week. And again, that will be less than what we would normally expect, but given what we've had so far this growing season, it would be beneficial in keeping the crops growing.
Tides them over for at least another week or so. And what about that extended forecast? What is it saying about moisture?
For the moisture, if we look at the 8 to 14, it's favoring a continuation of the drier than normal pattern for most of the state, and temperatures are expected to be on the warm side. We'll see how that develops. The month of July outlook was neutral. It was equally likely to be above or below normal on temperatures, and equally likely to be wetter or drier than normal. So the question will be, how does the next round play out? So far, it's been fairly favorable, and we'd like that to continue.
At least we've managed to avoid that customary run of 100-degree plus days here in July so far.
Well, we had that in June, and we'd just as soon have that be our longest stretch of hot weather. The other thing that we're watching is yesterday they issued a La Niña watch. The conditions in the Pacific are still neutral, but models are suggesting that a La Niña might develop. What we're eyeing particularly closely is, when does that start?
And that's pretty important, you say.
Yes, that can be very critical for us in Kansas, because an early onset, say an August onset, is more strongly correlated with hot, dry conditions in the fall, which of course are critical to getting our winter wheat established. If it's later in the onset, if it doesn't develop until the October time frame, it tends to be more of a milder than usual winter and not have the negative impacts that we might have seen with an earlier onset.
Well, we will watch La Niña.
We will watch and see how that develops.
You bet. Have a good weekend, Mary. Thank you for coming over.
Thanks, Eric.
Joining us from the Weather Data Library here at K-State, Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp, and that is our time for today and for the week. As always, we appreciate you joining us. Please be back with us on Monday. Until then, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good weekend for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.